Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I'm delighted to say that Lianne McCafferty is back. Hello, Lianne.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
And you are here to talk about this beautiful book, Juno, More Than Meets the Eye. And it is lovely. And I was so excited when it came through my letterbox because I know that it feels like it's been a long time coming, doesn't it? You know, that you've had a few dates where it was going to come out and then no, and then yes.
Do you know what? It actually wasn't long because I only started pulling the book together as such early September last year, and then it was published. Was it beginning of February? So in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't long. But by the time I kind of pulled together, I had the designer, the proofreader, by the time we all pulled together and aligned, it ended up being born when it was meant to be born, you know. So I think I probably thought I'd start writing it and then it would just be sort of done, blah, 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 blah. But it was teamwork, to be honest. And I think it was like a case of when everyone in the team, everything just aligned at the right time. And as you know, astrologers, we know that that's what happens.
We
So yeah.
certainly do. So, for those who don't know, who is Juno?
So Juno was the long-suffering wife of Jupiter, or if we translate to Greek mythology, Zeus and Hera. So Hera is Juno's counterpart, so to speak, alter ego, if you like. And they're, two sides of the same coin in many ways. There are a slight few differences in the myth, but it doesn't matter too much, to be honest. So really, Juno was queen of all the gods alongside Jupiter. But in her own right, Juno was part of a really powerful dynasty. Juno was Jupiter's sister, as well as being the wife, because the gods were incestuous, as we know. Therefore, daughter of Saturn and granddaughter of Uranus, and sister of Pluto, sister of Neptune, sister of Ceres and Vesta. So etc. Really part of a powerful dynasty, if you like. But just the fact that she was Jupiter's wife puts her on a pedestal as such. But Juno was really highly revered in Roman culture. She had temples devoted to her, coins minted, and she was very much seen as a protector of the people of Rome and amongst many other things. So in her own right, Juno's a very powerful deity.
I was very interested in learning that every month had a festival in her name,
Yeah,
but that they were basically celebrating different facets of her personality or her gifts. Tell
yeah,
us about that.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I go into this in quite a lot of detail, but in the book about Juno's various epithets, roles, if you like, and they very much, like you say, the different parts of a personality, so to speak. And the fact that they were, there was sort of celebrations every month, very much ties Juno into the lunar cycle as well. But yeah, Juno has so many sort of epithets and things like that. So you've got, for example, Juno, Sospita, protector of Rome, protector of the people. You've got Juno Lucina, who is protector of women in childbirth, protector of the feminine principle. That very much sort of links into the lunar principle, etc. You've got Juno Regina, who is like the consort that royal wife, so to speak, who's very much that political influence and the negotiator, you know. And we've got Juno Curatus, and Curatus translates to the word spear. It derives from the Latin word for spear. So we've got a martial Juno as well, fighting for people's rights and fighting for rights within relationships and in society, for example. So Juno's very multifaceted for sure, yeah.
She would have to be because she is queen, and therefore there has to be different roles that she plays. What is the orbit of Juno?
So Juno's situated in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and the orbit is about 4.5 years. But it's not a regular cycle, it's elliptical. So Juno can spend more time in one sign than another, and just depending at what point of the orbit it's at, whether it's apogee or perigee, that type of thing. But it's around 4.5 years, and that makes Juno really useful, particularly in forecasting, because that the inner planets move very, very quickly. Mercury and Venus are always moving quickly. Mars takes around 2 years to orbit, the chart, and Juno's about double that. And then we move to Jupiter, who's what 12 years to orbit a chart. So we've got a like halfway house, don't we? So Juno's ideal for kind of mid-term forecasting. So, and it gives a very sort of personal read on a chart, but from a slightly longer perspective, but one that's relatable. Sometimes when we're talking about Pluto transits or Neptune transits, they're quite long. They're quite long, and they're sort of tied into the personal, but they have a very collective resonance as well. Whereas Juno has kind of the best of both worlds. It's very relatable and trackable, not so much on a daily sort of level, but more of a weekly and monthly level. And those, we have Juno returns every 4.5 years, and they're really great signposts in our relationships or our business relationships or any kind of creative endeavor or just where we're devoting our energy to in particular. So that they're just, little 4.5 year chunks that are sort of really useful to sort of be able to reflect back onto. I sometimes, if you're working with clients and you're looking at Pluto or Neptune transits and you say, oh, can you look back to maybe 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, people go a bit, well, I think this was going on then. I'm not quite sure. But someone can usually remember what's going on around 4.5 years ago, can't they? Yeah.
I was thinking about this concept of the queen, which is really about maturity and reaching maturity. And so I'm wondering whether Juno would, or Juno transits, or perhaps progressions even, would be indicative of points in time in which we are challenged to rise to a certain level of maturity. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I describe Juno as a mature version of Venus. Okay, throughout the book, I keep referring to that. Venus loves the romance and the nice things in life and all the lovely things in relationships. Juno is about the reality, it's about the nuts and bolts of relationships. It's about all the stuff that we probably hate about our partner and perhaps just turn a blind eye to, but can't get away from. It's about all the nitty gritty, when you get married or you're in a long-term commitment with someone, there's certain things that you have to accept that you perhaps would rather not. You have to sit down and work the finances out together, and it's not always comfortable. You perhaps have to sit down and work other uncomfortable facets of your relationship out together. So, yeah, Juno is about the grown-up versions of relationships. It's about ripping off the rose-tinted glasses. And I think those Juno returns or, Juno progressions or transits from Juno or to natal Juno, they do open our eyes, and we have to get real about things, which we perhaps don't see so much from a Venus perspective, or perhaps we choose not to because it's Venus. And Venus
Well,
likes
I
nice
don't
things.
know because I think Venus is the princess, really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's all about that, all about the attraction
Yeah.
and passion and the expression of the passion,
Yeah.
and obviously, very importantly, the sensuality and the values. What do we value?
Yeah.
I think, and our resources. But I think when it comes to growing up and graduating from princess to queen,
Yeah.
then it's how do we use the resources, and how do we maintain a sense of integrity and remain true to what we value.
Yeah.
And those are very challenging grown up questions. And of course, it's in relationship that we are most, in our personal relationships, where we are most challenged in that way. But, in work situations, how much integrity do you have?
Mhm.
What will you have to witness before you become a whistleblower? Are you
Ooh.
willing to take risks to maintain your integrity?
Yeah.
And I think that's the grown up, the courage. Do you have the courage to be honest with your partner? This is grown up stuff. And
Mm.
then, of course, what kind of queen are you going to be?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, that makes a lot of sense, for sure, because Juno sees everything. So, Juno sees everything in relationships, just cuts through all the, like say, the rose tinted, the petals and the, all of that. And it's about the reality. And there's always a balance. And Juno absolutely loves balance or maintaining the best possible status quo. Often we can't have everything perfect in a relationship. There's something that you will have to compromise on, and that's where Juno comes in. And it gets to the point, it's like, what are you prepared to compromise on? What fits with your idea of, for example, the fair division of power in a relationship? That would mean something different to different people. um, you know, what are you prepared to turn a blind eye to? You know, is something about your partner or something that your partner does, or perhaps something that your partner does that doesn't align with your particular value system. Is it small enough that you can just let it go? Or is it something that you just know you cannot align with and maintain an authentic sense of self or sense of balance within the relationship? Are you going to give away too much of yourself or too much of your values to accept that from a partner? And we can go back through all the myths of Juno and all of Jupiter's infidelities, all the affairs he had, all the illegitimate offspring he had, some of which Juno turned a blind eye to, some of which she went full in for revenge and got her own back. But at the end of the day, Juno, on the whole, remained incredibly loyal and tolerant, but was always aware of what was going on. And I think it's a very personal choice what you're prepared to tolerate within a relationship. Um, yeah.
And again, that takes some wisdom too. And I was just thinking, we're talking about
Maturity. It takes a lot of experimenting, I think, to get to the
it
point.
does. And
Yeah.
we're talking about it in the context of relationships, but parents, and and adults generally when dealing with children. So
Mm.
I can remember when I was teaching, and there were some children who were very, very challenging. And I learned very quickly not to try to control them.
Yeah.
Uh, so what I did was I had to decide which battles to fight,
Yeah. Yeah.
because otherwise it would be too oppressive, counterproductive, and create a great deal of resistance. Besides which, it is not my wish to quash anything.
Yeah.
So I had to think, okay, safety, their own personal safety, the
Yeah.
safety of the other children. So those were red lines, okay? But then it was, all right, they're disruptive because they find it difficult to sit still for long periods.
Yeah.
Well, punishing them for finding it difficult to sit for long periods is not going to be helpful here. So can I do something? In my mind, I'm basically negotiating to see where the tolerance is,
Yeah.
to see how we can achieve the minimum and build on it slowly. And then once we've got that sorted out, we can work on something else.
Yeah.
And I think that is the principle really that we're talking about here, which applies to any relationship. And ultimately it comes back to power, isn't it?
It is.
The
It's about
balance
the
of power.
division of power, absolutely. And when we're talking about Juno, Juno's so boxed in to, like, the synastry of the perfect partner, but it can be any relationship, and it can be a relationship with a business, a relationship with a creative endeavor, any form of relationship. And Juno is about people's rights. Juno wants people to have their rights. Juno fights for people's rights. And the example you've just given is about the children's rights to express themselves in a healthy, creative way, and not be too squished in, not to be too restrained. But it's about that balance, isn't it? You've got to allow them a certain amount of freedom, but if you give too much, everything's going to fall apart and there'll be anarchy almost, won't there? So it's about respecting people's rights, and being fair about how power is implemented. And when those things are considered, then a relationship can come from a healthy foundation. And ultimately, if a relationship has a healthy foundation, that's where growth comes from.
We're talking about power, and this is a very interesting discussion to be having in relation to Juno, because it brings me to Pluto, which
Mhm.
is all about power. But it is different, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's completely different type of power. It's Juno's more about autonomy and taking responsibility. It's that mature side of Venus. And Juno's very cardinal. Juno likes to get things done. It likes to it's full of initiative, and it's constantly about the effort to recalibrate that sense of power, rather than that intense compulsion to control everything, which is more Pluto, I think. Um, yeah, Juno is very much about just making sure that the division of it is fair. Um, but there's a shadow side to Juno as well. Every planet has a shadow side. Though the shadow sides of planets just represent the shadow sides that we all have. Okay. And like I was saying, Juno's, quite politically, likes to get in the mix there. Juno will interfere when necessary, and Juno will take revenge when necessary. But I think it's more from a case of trying to just highlight the fact that there is a need for the balance of power to be recalibrated. Juno's about the recalibration. And if you think about relationships, all right, and this can be business, financial, romantic, whatever it is, mother, child, whatever. Okay. The balance within a relationship fluctuates, doesn't it? As both people mature, grow, circumstances around us affect us. Someone might get ill, someone might lose money, etc., right? It's natural for the power dynamics within a relationship to fluctuate throughout time. So we're always having to recalibrate, and try and make the best of um, what we can, if that makes sense. And that's very much Juno as well. It's just shining a light on what needs recalibrating.
And, as you're talking about the shadow, it comes back to what I said. What kind of queen are you going to be? Are you going to be a fair queen, or
Yeah,
are you going to be a queen that demands complete and utter adoration, or off with your head? What's it going to be? And we get these moments in mythology where we get a glimpse of that shadow queen appearing. And I was just thinking about, the golden apple uh,
yeah,
episode,
yeah.
where really, did she need to have that apple? You know, was it really important? Everybody knows she's queen. I always feel like really she should have known better. Um, but we're human, isn't it? Or aren't we? And because we're human, we can stray. And I think that that's an interesting reminder.
Well, it is, and that's a really interesting point, because I think we need to flip this a little bit, because we're talking about Juno, about the relationships with our partners, but we're one half of that relationship as well. And June is about the reality. So we have to be real about ourselves. And we're not perfect. We all have shadows. And it's about, Juno rips off those rose tinted glasses, as I've said. You can't hide anything from Juno. So we have to be real about ourselves and what we bring to the relationship, and the shadow we bring to the relationship, because we bring our less than perfect selves to a relationship. And Juno's about that part of us that's less than perfect. Because how often do any of us actually look in the mirror and focus on our flaws? Yeah, we prefer
Well,
not to. We prefer not to. But we're quite happy to look at our partners and look at their flaws.
absolutely. And that's the easy thing to do. Uh,
Exactly.
One detail that is in your book, which I really loved thinking about, because it hadn't occurred to me before, and it really is indicative of the extent to which he is associated with relationships, is the fact that June is named after her.
Yeah, yeah,
And everybody wants a June wedding.
absolutely. It was meant to be fortuitous. And it's a very fertile time of year, isn't it? And everything feels better in June, and it's the middle of the year, and everything's sort of becoming ripe, etc., etc. At least in the northern hemisphere. I know it can be slightly different in a different part of the world. But yeah, it was all about everything being fortuitous, and Juno, absolutely. Yeah, that's where it comes from. It's
The
beautiful.
longest day. The longest day.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
There is an association with the peacock, which we talked about the last time we were discussing
Yeah,
Juno.
yeah.
But actually, what I'd really like for you to elaborate on is the link between the peacock and the phoenix.
Okay, so let me just pull this out. So I go quite into Jung's work with the peacock, don't I? Let me see what I
Yeah.
wrote about this, because Jung very much relates the peacock to rebirth, rejuvenation. Let me just get my little peacock section out here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so we hear Jung says the mother's food during her pregnancy and blood is blood and peacock's flesh. The peacock is an early Christian symbol for the Redeemer, but the peacock is second cousin to the phoenix. So Jung's tying the peacock into that sense of renewal, being reborn. And then that takes us even further into Juno's connection to the moon and those lunar cycles of every month being reborn, rejuvenated. And if we take in one of Juno's epithets, Juno Lucina, and the base of that name comes from Aya Veneserae, okay, which is quite hard to pronounce, but it means to sort of be reborn, be rebirthed, to be reprotected, and it's be rejuvenated. And that's what we have with the Phoenix, isn't it? Which we often link to Pluto. So we have a Pluto transit, we go down into Hades, the underworld, and then we rise afterwards from the ashes, from the flames, the Phoenix reborn. So the peacock's really a cousin of the Phoenix.
And
So
it comes back to what we were saying about both of them being linked with power in a
yeah,
different way.
yeah, absolutely. Juno's a very, very powerful deity. She's a wife of the king of gods. But that power manifests in many, many, many different ways, as you can see in the book, because there's a lot of variety in the book there. Yeah, so it's very powerful. And I always say to people, if you can't quite grasp Juno in the natal chart or in progressions or transits, etc., treat Juno just a little bit like Mars, i.e., a very cardinal energy that's coming along and activating and empowering any part of the chart that it's hitting. Because that's what Juno does. She tends to empower rather than disempower. Yeah.
So where is she right now, for everyone who's wondering?
So I actually just did a little Instagram video thing this morning. I know this this won't coincide because this will probably go out at a later date. So Juno's actually stationed today at 0159 of Sagittarius, and it's stationed. So stationing in a lovely fire trine with the sun ingressing Aries tomorrow. Okay, so we've got a beautiful fire trine going on there. And of course, we've got Mercury and Venus retrograding in Aries, and they're going to form a beautiful fire trine each as well. Mercury on the 27th of March at about 1:47 of Aries and Sag, and Venus on the 24th, and that will be at 01:53 of Aries and Sag. So we've got some gorgeous fire trines. Going on with Juno. And a couple of things I spoke about today, because Juno has a natural affinity with fire. Okay, she's placed in Aries in the Discovery chart, and a gorgeous fire trine with the moon and Venus in Leo. But what I said this morning was, now is the perfect time to reflect on where you're going to devote your creative energy during the year. What inspires you, how you might inspire others. But most importantly, what are you going to fight for in the year ahead? Where will you direct your courage, your loyalty, your leadership? Who and what will you protect? In which areas will you fight for a fair division of power? Where are you going to fight for your rights? Where will you take action? Where will you ignite something new, wonderful, dynamic, that will make you feel reborn and empowered? What is your vision for the year ahead? And that's where I directed people to regarding these gorgeous Juno fire trines. They're the type of themes that we could really just plug into with this Aries ingress. Yeah.
It's so funny because that echoes the Substack I've just written to go out for the equinox. And although I wasn't looking at Juno for this in particular, I was looking at the fire, and I was looking at the way in which, and I'm just pulling it up because there are things that you said there, and I just wanted to show the echo um, because it really is so true that we are having to make choices here.
Yeah,
And it very much is, because it's fire and because we have these retrogrades going back
yeah,
into Pisces. And we need to ask ourselves, are the actions that we're planning to take appropriate? Are we in danger of overreacting? Might we be confident to the point of arrogance? And if we are to make the most of this beautiful energy, we must first examine our intentions to ensure that they are of the highest and most noble quality. Failure to do so can mean missed opportunities, and an energy that promises rejuvenation can turn
yeah,
into conflict.
yeah. How
So
beautiful is that? Synchronicity, yeah,
look, we've
absolutely.
just written it. You were looking at Juno. I was looking at the whole picture for the equinox and the relationship between the sun, the moon, Venus, and Mercury, as you were talking about. And I also had an eye on Juno there as well. But
Yeah.
it really is this, before we move forward,
We
where
have
are
to
our hearts?
reflect. Yeah,
Yes, where are our hearts before we move forward?
yeah.
Because we're kind of, the spring energy is there, the fire's there, we're ready to go. But Mercury and Venus are going, oh, you're running that way, we're running this way. We've got to get back. And what do we have to get back to? There's unfinished business. And
Oh,
we've got to get that
absolutely,
straight.
absolutely. And the fact that Juno is stationed on this ingress very close to the moon, because the moon's at what, 6 Sagittarius on this ingress. So Juno's conjunct the moon. So there's a very strong feminine principle going on here as well. But we have to go back and reflect on all of those themes that we've just mentioned there before we can move forward authentically. And there's going to be some huge changes coming this year. There's going to be huge opportunity. There's going to be some choices that people have to make. Some will be personal choices. Some might be forced upon us by what's going on in the world. And we need to reflect very carefully about what we want to leave behind versus what we want to take forward. And we only want to be taking forward what is going to really serve us and be helpful for us and healthy for us. Because it has been a really tough few years. And I think people thought, once Pluto moved out of Capricorn and we got rid of all that stuff, life would change. But we're still carrying it all with us. It's such a slow process to evolve and move into this new era of air and fire. And you know, I think all these retrograde planets at the moment, and the fact that this year Saturn and Neptune are going to go into Aries and then bounce back the unit into Pisces, the universe is giving us time to think, to adjust, to reflect, and to try and make the best decisions that we possibly can going forward. So I think there is time to pause and consider our next steps. Definitely. Yeah.
And I think it might be good to just add a little footnote, because we're talking about the archetype of the queen. And the footnote would be for the men watching. And how does that archetype work within male energy? Because they might be looking to think about, the archetype of the king. So do you feel an energy that's projected onto the women in their lives? Or how do they integrate this very powerful but yin archetype into their own energy?
That's a really interesting question. And I've just had two images coming to my mind. Okay, so I've just had one of a chessboard. All right, so if you think of the king and the king only moves one square at a time and has to be constantly defended. And the queen can just flit here, there, and everywhere, and be very dynamic and very strategic around the board. And then the other image that's just come into my head, if there's a lot of talk about this toxic masculinity at the minute, and I'm thinking about the Tate brothers, etc., which people are now blaming on the fact that there's been such a strong feminist movement that women hate men, and men are now standing up and pushing back against this feminine uprising. I don't think it's about women wanting to be more powerful than men. It's about wanting that equal footing. But men, or the likes of this toxic masculinity, the likes of the Tate brothers, for example, are trying to bounce it once again back onto that it's women's fault. It's women's blame. And we talked about similar things when we talked about Lilith not so long ago, about women being demonized. But no, I think Juno demands respect. Juno demands a fair division of power. It's about equality. It's not about women being better than men or more powerful than men. So I think perhaps, and it might be a generational thing with men. It's about I don't know. It's a very
I think
complicated,
it's a
difficult
very
question.
difficult, it's a very difficult thing because what
Yeah,
we have is political entities who are sowing division
yeah,
between men and women. And there are definitely militant feminist groups out there
yeah,
who
yeah.
are demonizing men. There is no question about
Yeah, which isn't healthy.
which is totally unhealthy. And understandably, men are feeling emasculated by that toxic propaganda.
Yeah,
And I must say that those militant feminists, I think I better use that term, militant feminists are equally damaging to the feminine because they also have no respect for yin energy. So there is no respect for yin and there is no respect for yang. And both men and women are the losers when we have these power games being played out by
absolutely.
so we want to leave politics right out of this. And I I think actually listening to you and the analogy of the chessboard is probably the best thing that we could say in terms of men taking on the archetype of the queen, which is to say that this is the aspect of themselves that is freer to negotiate and make deals and be politically savvy and have the freedom to act in a way that the king doesn't. And so for men listening and thinking about that archetype in their charts and what it could mean, that I think is probably the most constructive use they could make of Juno, because the king's power is more limited by virtue of his position, but the queen, by virtue of being the queen, has more freedom. And I think if men can harness that, that's a beautiful way to have that yin archetype in their lives.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good point, without a doubt, because I think we're probably still at the point where many men, probably the older generations, are sort of not so confident tapping into that, for example. And it's about perhaps being using that political strategy. Juno is a political strategist, okay? And rather than going in full on attack. And we're seeing those archetypes at the minute, okay? We're watching Putin, who just is an aggressor. Trump is an aggressor. And there's other ways of wielding power rather than full on, aggression, whether it's creating a trade war or physical, military war. There's other ways of being strategic and wielding power, um, that can perhaps result in, much, much more positive outcomes. And I'm looking at the minute, we've got these sort of Pluto in Leo generation, archetypes, Putin, Trump, they're all Pluto and Leos. Trump's the worst because he's got that unaspected Pluto and Leo, you know, in his natal chart. And they're just these classic archetypes. And I'm just picturing Juno just sat shaking her head and going, there's a better way of doing this. There's a better way of doing this for sure.
Actually, the what you've just said there is so encouraging because let's face it, those characters are multiplied all over the world.
Oh yeah,
Their
yeah. There are
position,
the headlines
their
right now.
position
Yeah,
is amplified, or
yeah,
their identity is amplified by virtue of where they are and the power that they wield by virtue of where they are in the world stage. However, there are plenty of Putins, Trumps, and out there all over governments, including
yeah,
our local governments and everywhere else. They're all
yeah,
there. So, how do we get round this? And we get round this by using our acumen
yeah,
and wit
yeah,
and forming allegiances and
yeah.
chatting,
Collaboration.
going and collaboration. And we say, do you know what, guys?
Yeah,
Thank you very much. You've made it very clear that we can't vote out this abuse of power because whoever goes in, we've got power mongers. So
yeah,
clearly the system's not working. Bye.
yeah,
Let's go and try something else. And
yeah,
that is yin energy, at its best in a way, but it also needs yang energy to support it and to help to build. So this is where we come now to the alchemical king and queen, the union of the two,
yeah,
which I think maybe the reason I asked about that energy within men is because I think it behoves us all to work on bringing together yin and yang within ourselves. And I think that in as much as we were talking about how to integrate a yin energy into a man's heart, as women, we also need to bring in and integrate yang energy into our hearts. And
yeah,
so this brings us to that alchemical king and queen, which is the union of the two energies. And the more we can do that, then the stronger we are within ourselves. And the less likely we are to fall into the shadow and to be able to create those alliances and
yeah.
collaborations that we so need.
Yeah, it's like that sun moon midpoint, isn't it? It's that marriage midpoint within ourselves. And if we balance that within ourselves, then we can approach the world from a healthy and a wise perspective, I think, and a very aware perspective. But it's like, I think you have to be at a certain point of personal evolvement to to manifest that. And I look at a lot of the leaders around the world, and I do wonder about their personal evolvement. We're
Well,
making a lot of children in men's bodies, aren't we, at the moment?
well, here's how I see it. The last Harry Potter book or film, whichever you prefer, Harry has the wand of power. And what does he do with it? He breaks it. He breaks it and he throws it away. The problem we have is that those in power are there because they crave power. And until we understand that that's why they're there, we're always going to be chasing and looking for rescue from the wrong knight. It's up to us to get on the horse and go somewhere. Because while we trust people who seek to be in power, we are never going to be happy because they seek power.
Mhm.
That is the definition of somebody who should never be in power.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that in all the leaders that I've just mentioned
Oh, and the
already.
one preceding them, you know.
Yeah. I know, absolutely. And, people vote in good faith because they think the next leader's going to make a difference, but they'll make a difference, but probably not for the greater good.
No.
No. So, yeah, we're
So
seeing it all around the world. We really are. And yeah.
we are. And so we will end on a note of optimism.
Yes, it's
Disco
got to get better.
Discover your Juno and work with her, and then you can begin to work in a way that is better and turn your back on the insanity that, for the time being, seems to be prevailing around us.
Well, exactly. And you can work in a realistic way, in a mature way, and a practical, evolved way. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, our conversations always take on go off in directions neither of us will have predicted.
I know,
And
I
I
know.
love that. Thank you so much, Lianne.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me again.
And so, a reminder to everyone that the book that we have been discussing is this one, a beautiful book called
You.
Juno, More Than Meets the Eye. And I will be putting a link to it in the description box. Lianne, what other links will I be putting into the description box?
So my website, liannemccafferty.com. I'm on all the usual social media platforms. I can send you the exact links if you want, Anna, and then you can just cut and paste them in to your box. That's pretty much it, really. Just, all across social
Fantastic.
media. Yeah.
They will all be in the description box. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at astrology and the chakras. Until then, goodbye.